Chapter 16: Immigration and Demographic Engineering, Early Benefits, Late-Stage Mismatch, and the Illusion of Capability Substitution. Immigration alters capability density. Capability density determines whether complexity can be sustained. Modern states increasingly rely on immigration as a policy tool to offset demographic decline, labor shortages, and the growing operational demands of high-complexity societies. From post-war Western Europe to North America, East Asia, and the Gulf states, immigration has become the default mechanism for nations that can no longer generate sufficient domestic human capital. Yet the structural logic behind this choice is rarely examined with honesty. Immigration can temporarily offset demographic contraction, but only under conditions that no longer hold in late-stage societies. In early phases, immigration often increases capability density. In late phases, it frequently increases population without proportionally increasing capability. And once complexity surpasses capability, quantity alone cannot sustain the system. To understand immigration as a civilizational mechanism rather than a moral or ideological one, we must begin with the demographic arithmetic that drives modern policy. Most advanced nations reproduce below replacement. Fertility declines as societies industrialize and then post-industrialize. Rising education, urbanization, female workforce participation, high housing costs, delayed family formation, and cultural individualism reduce birth rates across nearly all advanced economies. These forces have proven almost entirely resistant to state intervention. Even aggressive pronatalist measures, cash incentives, parental leave, childcare subsidies, produce only brief, shallow increases in fertility. Japan, South Korea, Southern Europe, and much of Eastern Europe demonstrate that once a society enters sustained low fertility, reversal becomes almost impossible. This leaves immigration as the last major lever for governments attempting to stabilize population size and support their economic and administrative systems. The logic of immigration as a demographic substitute first appeared clearly in the mid-20th century. After the Second World War, Western Europe required a massive labor infusion to rebuild industry, infrastructure, and public services. West Germany's Gastarbeiter program, 1955 to 1973, is the archetype. Turkish, Italian, and Greek workers were recruited into a booming industrial economy supported by strong institutions, disciplined labor markets, and high social cohesion. Migrants entered a system operating at peak capability, where training pipelines, workplace norms, and institutional filters remained intact. Their labor increased volume without degrading competence. Immigration in this phase complemented domestic capability rather than substituting for it. This encouraged the mistaken assumption that immigration is inherently capability enhancing. In reality, immigration's structural effect depends entirely on timing, scale, skill composition, and the receiving society's institutional strength. When a nation is rising, expanding, cohesive, and staffed by high-capability operators, it can filter, integrate, and elevate migrants effectively. When a nation is stagnating, overextended, low fertility, administratively strained, the filtering mechanisms weaken, integration becomes harder, and the composition of inflows shifts from selective to broad-based. Instead of drawing disproportionately from the global top decile, late-stage societies draw from the global median. This creates the late-stage mismatch. The receiving state expects migrants to sustain a standard of living built by high capability density, but the skilled distribution of the inflow is no longer matched to the system's complexity. The modern administrative state requires operators who can navigate dense regulatory codes, sophisticated information systems, advanced logistics chains, and high-skilled professional environments. Migrants in late-stage phases often come from societies with lower educational baselines, different institutional norms, or limited exposure to high-complexity systems. This is not a moral failing, it is a structural one. The result is predictable and visible across many late-stage societies. Standards decline not because migrants are unwilling or incapable, but because the receiving society lowers its own filters to accommodate volume. Credentialing requirements soften, workforce screening weakens, language thresholds relax, training pipelines shorten. Institutions that once selected ruthlessly for competence now select primarily for availability. Downward pressure spreads across healthcare, education, construction, administration, policing, and customer-facing services. Public bureaucracies, once staffed by high-capability professionals, now relax standards simply to maintain headcount. Northern Europe illustrates this clearly. Sweden's post-2015 migration surge overwhelmed housing, healthcare, schooling, and policing capacity. Waiting times lengthened, classroom performance dropped, and administrative friction multiplied. The welfare system did not collapse, it adapted downward. The machine continued running, but at a visibly lower capability level. Healthcare demonstrates the same mechanism. The UK's National Health Service now relies heavily on overseas staff to maintain basic staffing ratios. Domestic training pipelines weakened for decades, creating structural dependence on imported labor. Headcount was preserved, but burnout increased, medical errors rose, and waiting lists exploded. Capability diluted even as the system technically expanded. Construction shows a similar pattern. Across Southern Europe and North America, migrant labor fills roles once dominated by skilled domestic tradesmen. This keeps labor costs down but erodes craftsmanship, safety standards, and reliability. Mistakes increase, supervision becomes more intensive, regulatory frameworks expand to compensate. The system generates more rules because it has fewer operators capable of meeting the old ones. Education displays the same structural mechanics. Late-stage migration produces classrooms with greater linguistic and cultural diversity, and often lower baseline preparation. Teachers compensate by lowering instructional rigor, prioritizing advancement over mastery. Long-term capability erosion follows. Domestic educational outcomes decline alongside migrant outcomes, shrinking the capability density of the next generation. Modern immigration also contains a structural inversion that is seldom acknowledged. Sending countries often lose their highest capability individuals to wealthier societies. Engineers, physicians, scientists, and technical professionals depart in large numbers. Sending societies lose capability density. Receiving societies gain capability, but in quantities too small to offset the dilution created by mass low-skill inflows. Two civilizational imbalances emerge simultaneously. Selective states manage this dynamic far more effectively. Singapore is the clearest example. It screens migrants aggressively and integrates them into institutional environments designed for high-capability operation. Large Western states cannot or will not apply these filters at scale. Ideology, political incentives, legal constraints, and administrative overload erode selectivity as institutions weaken. Late-stage immigration also introduces the problem of institutional load. Every additional resident increases system load, schooling demand, healthcare demand, housing demand, legal demand, administrative demand. If the marginal capability added is lower than the marginal load imposed, the gap widens. Early waves add more than they consume because institutions retain spare capacity. Late waves often consume more than they contribute, not through fault of their own but because the receiving system is already operating at capacity. Housing is scarce, schools are full, hospitals overstretched, infrastructure decaying. Additional inflows impose stress on systems already approaching their limits. Canada's current policy illustrates this clearly. Record immigration inflows have boosted headline GDP while housing shortages, infrastructure strain, falling productivity, and wage stagnation worsen. Population growth masks structural decay. The economy looks larger, the system becomes weaker. This is the illusion of capability substitution. This leads to the most uncomfortable observation. In late-stage societies, immigration sustains the appearance of capability while hollowing out its substance. Governments use immigration to delay the fiscal consequences of demographic collapse. The system grows larger but weaker, more populated but less capable, externally vibrant but internally brittle. Eventually the same constraint asserts itself. If capability does not rise with complexity, the system must simplify, shrink, or fail. Immigration can strengthen a society when it is selective, targeted, and aligned with structural needs. But mass immigration used as a patch for demographic decline accelerates capability erosion rather than preventing it. Immigration appears beneficial early in a society's arc and destabilizing late in its arc not because migrants differ, but because the receiving system does. The variable is not the migrant, it is the system's remaining capability density relative to its complexity load. A strong, cohesive, high-capability state can absorb and elevate migrants. A weakened, overextended, low-fertility state uses migrants to keep the machine running while quietly lowering its own standards. In the next chapter, we examine state capacity itself, how societies build, maintain, and lose the ability to operate complex institutions, and why capability decay always precedes systemic contraction.